Coming up on This Week in Computer Hardware, AMD's massive multi-core mayhem, T-Mobile's great big 5G threat, trouble with Red Dead Redemption 2 on AMD, and laser hacks for Amazon's Echo and Google Home. All that and so much more coming up next on Twitch.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twitch.
This is Twitch, This Week in Computer Hardware, episode 540, recorded on November 7th, 2019. AMD's massive multi-core mayhem. This episode of This Week in Computer Hardware is brought to you by ExpressVPN. Protect your online privacy with one click. Yes, it's that easy. For 3 extra months free with a 1-year package, go to expressvpn.com/twitch. And by iFixit. If you're tired of dealing with the ball and chain charger on your laptop, switch the battery yourself. iFixit makes it easy to swap the battery out on your Mac or PC with their all-in-one battery fix kits. Just visit iFixit.com/twitch and you'll get $10 off your next $50 fix. Welcome to Twitch, This Week in Computer Hardware, Twitch weekly show that's all about hardware. Kind of obvious from the name, but let me tell you, we're excited about desktops, laptops, gaming, working. We love networking. We love mobile. We love phones, and we might love 5G someday. Boy, we got some crazy stories for you, including Sprint's 5G threat. Hint, it involves the merger. We've got some updates on what's going on in the universe of, everything. Actually, VR, certain corners of it are finally shutting down. But the big news this week, I think, more than anything else, is what's going on with AMD and their, I'm going to quote Sebastian Peak here, massive multi-core mayhem. They got an announcement. They got a couple of new processors. And Sebastian Peak, PCPer.com's editor-in-chief, have you been benchmarking, or is this merely a news announcement?
Well, I have been benchmarking, but nothing that's unreleased. I'm benchmarking existing things in anticipation of this rollout. And today, AMD at 9 o'clock this morning Eastern had a couple of interesting press releases. One of them teasing processor availability November 25, 11/25. Mark your calendars, because that's when not just the 3950X that we've been talking about, that Ryzen 3000 desktop part, 16 cores, 32 threads, $749. That launches on the 25th. It actually has a release date now. That wasn't the big news.
Right.
The big news is they've officially announced the 3rd generation of Threadripper. So if you're not familiar, Threadripper, the massive multi-core monster CPUs for desktops and workstations from AMD, and they currently top out at the 2990WX, which is this crazy 32-core, 64-thread part. It's based on the Zen Core. I believe it's actually Zen Plus on those. But the new Threadrippers, they've only announced 2, at least to this point, the 3960X and the 3970X. They haven't increased the core count. You're still talking about a maximum 32 cores from that high-end 3970 part, 24 cores for the other part. But it's based on the brand new Zen 2 architecture, which, as we've talked ad nauseum about this year, significantly increased the performance per core from generation to generation. So if you think about the kind of instructions per clock IPC improvements that we've seen from Zen Plus to Zen 2 on desktop, imagine how that scales across 32 cores from this 3970X part, which, by the way, will not be inexpensive. And it's kind of staggering to think about the performance possibilities of this.
Right.
But pricing, I mean, we've been used to, in the last year, seeing things drop and drop and drop. A first-generation Threadripper is now so cheap that it's become the subject of, like, is it worth a budget build type article? And the biggest hurdle there is basically the motherboard cost. So if you already have a motherboard or can find a cheap one, those parts are just ridiculously cheap. And then the second-gen Threadripper has been dropping and dropping and dropping. These new parts are going to launch at $1399 for the 24-core, 48-thread 3960X, and then it's going to be $1999, so $2,000 for the 32-core, 64-thread 3970X. So these are not cheap, but in addition to the architectural improvements, you get more cache. They're up to 128 megabytes of cache. If you're comparing these to the Ryzen 3000 parts, there's just More PCIe lanes. That was actually a bit confusing, but we'll talk about that. The 88 total platform lanes, but only 72 of those are actually usable at any given time, which is sort of interesting. And then the other part of this announcement is that they will not work, even though they have the same number of pins in seemingly the same configuration. You cannot put one of these new CPUs in your current high-end Threadripper motherboard. So you're going to have to buy a new motherboard, and they have a new platform called TRX40. So you're going to have to buy a TRX40 motherboard if you want to buy one of these processors. So this is going to be kind of edge case. You need all of these cores. You need the fastest instructions per clock possible on a high-end workstation, because these are not going to be inexpensive CPUs. And then we have yet to see exactly what the platform itself is going to cost. But once again, I think this is PCIe 4 rearing its head and saying, maybe those old motherboards supported Threadripper just fine, but because of PCIe 4.0 requirements, we're not going to allow you to install the CPUs unless some renegade company decides to allow that with firmware. It seems like this may end up being a firmware limitation and not an actual physical limitation.
Interesting.
Oh, and by the way, they weren't done. For whatever reason, they decided to throw a little desktop Athlon part into the mix. It was in with the press release for the 3950X. The new Athlon 3000G is coming November 19. It's a little over a week away. It's going to be an unlocked 2-core, 4-thread mainstream desktop part with graphics for $49. So that could be an interesting ultra budget gaming option, but they just threw that in there. 3 processors, 72 cores wasn't enough. Let's make it 74 cores in November.
7 million cores, no waiting. Man, that's obviously a prime candidate for a budget build. You talk about budget building on AMD Threadrippers from the first or second generation because the prices have dropped so much. Would you really choose one of those over, like a Ryzen 2 or Ryzen 3 CPU at this point? Or is it purely if you need a ridiculous number of cores for the least amount of money?
You nailed it, like the latter. Obviously, if you're going after gaming performance, single-threaded performance, you'd go with one of the new Ryzens. Even the least expensive Ryzen part currently of the new generation would be the 3600, the non-X, which sells for about $190 to $200. And that's going to get you great gaming performance, great desktop performance at 6 cores. But if you want a 16-core part and the applications you're running are more dependent on the number of cores you have than necessarily clock speeds, et cetera, then there is a case you can make for a first-gen Threadripper part. And there are certainly people who are on those systems who see no reason to upgrade at this time unless they can move to either a higher core count or see just the kinds of gains that would make the difference in price kind of pay for itself. Like we're talking about, I think AMD was advertising that they've already seeded out these processors and platforms to Hollywood studios, and there have been some things already rendered with these. So that makes a big difference because they're saving a lot of time. But if you're on a 2990WX system right now, and you see this, and you've been hoping for that 64-core part to move over to, and you see 32 again, then it just becomes a matter of percentages. Is it worth whatever the IPC increase is going to be? Is it 10, 15, 20%? Is that worth buying a $2,000 part and then another, $400 or $500 motherboard? It depends on you and what you're going to use it for. I will say one interesting thing that came out of this announcement, not related to Threadripper, but related to the desktop 3950X. We're used to Threadripper parts not coming with a cooler. You have to supply your own high-end cooling solution, or it comes shipped with it if you're buying a pre-built PC. But the desktop Ryzen's all the way up through the R9 3900X have shipped with a cooler in the box. They mentioned, there was a slide, the 3950X does not include a cooler. And in fact, they're recommending a minimum of a 280 millimeter liquid cooler for this processor. So the bigger, the better. So I'm thinking if they're going to start shipping these out, and especially if they come, like if reviewers get these and the reviewer's guide is telling us to use a 280 or a 360 radiator with these. I kind of have to question that 105 watt TDP, but we will see.
Well, certainly it probably idles at 105 watts, preferably less. Sure. I joke, kind of. Switching gears, changing direction. We've been haven't talked much about the sort of drama going around the Sprint T-Mobile merger at all, just because it's been too far out. And there's just been too much back and forth on that. But some interesting news came out this week. Basically this morning. And we're talking about a $26.5 billion merger. This is a huge deal. There's some questions about whether or not it's going to increase competitiveness because, of course, this merged company, this T-Mobile and Sprint, would ideally be able to compete better with AT&T and Verizon. There's also arguments that, Sprint has been making money forever and they're supposed to die. And what was crazy about this is Sprint announced that they would be lighting up their new 5G network on December 6th, and it would launch covering 200 million people, about 2/3 of the population of the United States, maybe a little less. And they said they will offer free 5G to first responders for a decade, free broadband to 10 million low-income households with children. And the CNET's adds scoop. It says these incentives, including free home broadband to 10 million low-income families, won't come without the merger. And all I could think of is 1,000 years ago, there was a magazine called National Lampoon, and there was a picture of a dog with a gigantic, like, .357 Python, some large chrome revolver pointed at the dog's head. The dog has this hysterical facial expression looking at the revolver, sort of side-eyeing the revolver. And it's like, buy this magazine or we'll shoot this dog. And this basically comes down to approve this merger or we won't give you a bunch of cool stuff that doesn't exist yet. For people who, like myself, have concerns about the utility of 5G, they're actually turning on. I love that. It's truly one of the best magazine covers. If you don't buy this magazine, we'll shoot this dog. Truly one of the best magazine covers of all time. Part of me was like, did I buy my new 5G hotspot too early? And on one hand, possibly, maybe I should have bought the fancy one that covered 5G. However, Sievert was talking with reporters after the event. This is another CNET article, that T-Mobile's existing plans will be able to access 5G. No changes or extra charges needed, except I don't think the hardware will actually access 5G. That's another conversation. But this is actually using low-band spectrum, i.e. more traditional wireless frequencies used with cell phone radios, not the millimeter wave stuff that they launched in 6 cities. And the millimeter wave stuff deliver these insane, ridiculous, unhinged, amazing speeds, but of course trees and walls and buildings, and occasionally I'm told by people who have more experience with it, things like city buses or maybe food trucks can wreak havoc on millimeter wave 5G. It's interesting to watch Sprint to be like, approve the merger and we'll give away more. But they're also talking about like a $15 a month phone plan. And they pretty flat out, they flat out said none of this is going to happen if T-Mobile and Sprint don't merge. Literally Mike Sievert, the T-Mobile's chief operating officer, quote, in CNET, everything we announced today is dependent on the massive capacity expansion that comes from the new T-Mobile, and they need the merger to make this happen. And they even used one of my most dreaded words ever in business reporting on technology: synergies. They're nothing compared to what we can do at a greater scale once we have the synergies and the combined network capacity of this new company. It's not saying that we won't, added CEO John Laguerre. We couldn't, nobody could, but there's magic in putting these two networks together, and that's why this is critically important. There's essentially like 15 states in Washington, D.C. Are fighting the merger. The Justice Department and the FCC have approved the deal. It will be interesting to see what happens, because the trial is coming up December 9th. So Sprint's hoping that the trial will be done with and the everything will start showing up or going through in early 2020. I'm super curious to see how this turns out. I'm super curious to see if that network gets lit up on December 6th. I'm super curious to see what the performance is like. This is also one of those classic things we like to say, well, we wait with bated breath. It would be nice if everything works the way it's supposed to. I'm also really curious to see what happens for obvious reasons, right? Because, I'm traveling in the airstream and using a lot of mobile data. Sprint was the only carrier that offered a fairly low price, 100 gigabyte plan for monthly gigabyte, 100 gigabyte monthly plan for mobile data for $60 a month. Now AT&T is adding, as of the tail end of October, and what I thought was a rather undercovered announcement, as of October 31st, they were talking about having 50 gigabyte and 100 gigabyte plans available. So, obviously, I have special interest in inexpensive, massive amounts of inexpensive data, but I'm very, very curious to see, because we've heard rumors, there are rumblings that more data will get less expensive as 5G networks roll out. So we will see what happens. And if you're curious what phones are going to work on the new 5G network that Sprint's rolling out using their existing network, is where did it go? Samsung's Galaxy Note 10 Plus 5G and the OnePlus 7T Pro 5G McLaren edition. And Sebastian, McLaren is a manufacturer of fancy cars.
Oh, I know. I think they're like the mid-engine, ultra premium sports cars, right?
Give or take. I've seen a couple of them commuting in the Bay Area, which always delights me no end. Yeah.
That's what you want to do. You take your supercar out on the road to get from point A. It just gets me from point A to point B, people. That's all it's for.
I'm happy for people that want to take their incredibly expensive supercars out on the highways. I just feel bad that they really can't get out of first gear. Maybe second if they're out at midnight. So I don't know. I'm kind of curious to see where this all ends up. And I'm also kind of curious. This is one of those things that going into 2020, probably starting to a small degree at CES, we're going to see a lot more 5G releases from a lot more vendors, including, based on the rumors we were talking about last week, 5G iPhones. It's getting to the point where the networks seem to be rolling out and 5G is getting serious. This episode of This Week in Computer Hardware brought to you by ExpressVPN. I've been using ExpressVPN. I've been using VPNs for years, a really long time. I started using them to geolocate because basically I was in the United States and a bunch of curling video services played curling geo-fenced based on Canada. I used a VPN to virtually pretend I was in Canada. And magically, lo and behold, I could stream the Canadian curling videos. And certainly these days, using a VPN like ExpressVPN, it's all about making sure your network data, your connection to the internet is secure, and doing it without slowing down your internet speed. It is so easy for hackers to try to tap into your data if it's loose. You may be like, yeah, I've got HTTPS. Well, yeah, HTTPS is secure just like everything else in technology until somebody figures out a way to hack it. You don't want to deal with somebody trying to crack your Wi-Fi connection using something like crack. It's a key reinstallation attack. Look, if you're in a hotel or a shopping mall, or if you're in the airport, you should be running a VPN just to protect yourself and your data. Best way to ensure that all your data is encrypted and can't be read by hackers, using our sponsor, ExpressVPN's VPN service. It is so simple. If you can download an app on your phone or your computer, you can get and press a button. You got to be able to download an app, install an app, and press a button. I'm pretty sure everybody listening to this show can do this. And you click one button, you secure 100% all of your network data. ExpressVPN is fast, it's reliable, and recommended as the #1 VPN provider by TechRadar and CNET. And they're actually taking privacy and security to the next level. They invented a technology called Trusted Server to ensure that VPN servers run from RAM, so no data logs are written to a server's hard drive, even by accident. It's really simple. If you don't want your ISP to track everything you're doing, run a VPN. If you're on a public network in a coffee shop or a hotel and you're nervous about who's out there and what they might be doing, and you should be, use a VPN. I do it all the time. You can do it too. Now, if you want the best in online security and privacy protection, head over to expressvpn.com/twitch for 3 extra months free with a 1-year package. Protect your internet today with the VPN I trust to keep my data safe. Go to expressvpn.com/twitch to get started. And we want to thank ExpressVPN for their support of This Week in Computer Hardware. I will say, just to maximize the efficiency, because I'm actually running on that Togo RoadLink C2 with the unlimited data package from AT&T right now. This is my second successful Skype experience on that. I decided not to run a VPN just to give myself all possible performance advantages. Yeah, well, I'm pretty sure this is all going public, and it's all public right now. So I'm not too worried about security at the moment. Although, who knows what you're doing, Sebastian? I hear you
don't want to know. You don't want to know. Hacking into you right now. I'm changing the script.
Careful what you do, sir. Careful what you do. I'm just going to say one word. Honeypot. I'm going to leave it there. Red Dead Redemption 2 has apparently been a nightmare on AMD, especially people are blaming AMD Ryzen BIOS issues. What is going on? You got a good article on that from Tom's Hardware.
Yeah. Well, I heard about this just from readers of our site on the PC Public Discord. There were a few people who upgraded to the new Ryzen processors when they came out, and they're really excited about them. They've been really looking forward to this game. And then I started seeing these complaints about the game not launching. The launcher would quit. They couldn't get around it. They're looking for answers. If you look around on social media and Reddit, you would see many, many complaints about this over the last couple of days, culminating with, well, first it was finger pointing. Rockstar said that it was AMD's fault, basically. And then they were blaming users trying to launch the game using outdated graphics drivers, which, graphics drivers will optimize a game and improve its performance, but I don't think a game will just fail to load if you're running outdated graphics drivers. But anyway, they came out early yesterday morning and said that they were releasing a new version of the launcher for Rockstar games to address some of these problems. However, if you check it out, like Reddit or other sources where the AGESA code version that you're running with your new Ryzen processor apparently affects this. And it's the people running the latest version, well, say the latest version available to them, but not the absolute latest version, which corrects some sort of an error that there is in the actual microcode. So if AGESA 1.0.0.3 anything is supposed to be the actual problem here because of some sort of an error in the microcode that didn't exist in the 0.0.2 pre-launch version. So if you can downgrade to that, if it's still available for you to download and downgrade to, people have been successfully doing that and launching their games. 2 people that I've spoken with who, just in our chat, who've actually been able to successfully load the game, they're actually on that pre-launch version of the BIOS. So they're on 0.0.2. So, it's one of those things where they don't release exactly what is changing with each of these AGESA code updates, which are essentially CPU microcode revisions. But somewhere along the line, some errors got in that have been corrected, but you have to have the 0.4 Rev B, I think, update, which that's another gray area that we won't even get into because AMD said that there are beta versions of it that motherboard partners have actually released, and the actual full AGESA 1.0.0.4b version may or may not be available from your motherboard vendor just yet. So that's even more fun, but it sounds like as long as you're on anything 0.4, the game will load. But it's interesting. We don't usually see a CPU causing a game not to load. The only other instance of this recently, and I didn't think it was necessarily worth a story, it was kind of funny, there were complaints that the original Max Payne from like 2001 does not load on these, I think it was Ryzen processors again. So they've apparently found something that has been corrected in later firmware revisions, or maybe, although AMD didn't sound especially, they weren't making it a huge priority to get Max Payne 1 working. And whether or not Max Payne even runs on modern hardware is something I'm not sure about. Apparently it does. But yeah. We're looking at a headline here if you're watching the video. AMD Ryzen 3000 CPU is apparently not compatible with old PC games. It's kind of a stretch because apparently it's just one game, but maybe they have a longer list.
Well, it has, I guess Red Dead Redemption 2 is not an old PC game, now that I think about it. But
it's not the oldest
I don't know,
one. I mean, it's a few days old, but yeah.
Several days old. Well, no, I mean, 1,000 years ago in the early days of inkjet printers, I had one of the really, and this is a long time ago, it was an early Canon inkjet printer, and we couldn't get it to print. And I had like 3 days. I tried drivers and this and that. And I finally ended up with like the project manager and one of the engineers. And, this was, I think we were running a fairly high-end Pentium processor to give you an idea how long ago this was. And they did all their QA with 486s. And they were like, oh, well, they finally like got one of the printers and got one of the I don't know if somebody took it home or they found like the fastest PC in the building, and they immediately replicated the problems I had and then figured out how to fix them and release the driver updates. But it was one of those things where, because they didn't test them on the latest hardware, they had no idea they had problems until they sent them out to reviewers. And it's hardware QA. It takes time. Software QA takes time, and they generally aren't going to be. When did Max Payne originally come out? Talk about dated. Is this a? Yeah, the original Max Payne came out July 23rd, 2001. Man, gathering of developers, I miss those people. That's a 18-year-old PC game. I can see why it would not be a super priority to test with 15 to 20-year-old PC games on your new flagship processor. Am I understating the importance of testing with ancient processors? I know you're an ancient game enthusiast.
I am. I'm one of those vintage PC nerds, I think is what we're called. Basically, people who think that really old hardware is cool. I mean, we must own it. We must have like hands-on with it. It's not enough to emulate it as perfectly as you can emulate things these days. I like to have the old stuff. But, actually, this story reminded me immediately of if you've ever watched a video on YouTube from LGR. Clint from that channel does basically vintage gaming, vintage PC reviews and stuff. And he, a while back, it was like back in 2015 or something, he reviewed an old Stealth graphics card. It was a Savage 4 Pro Diamond Stealth 3 S540 graphics card. And the one game he tested where it wouldn't work at all was Max Payne. Apparently that game is just kind of hard to run. It didn't like the Savage 4 graphics. It was fine with Voodoo graphics. It doesn't like Ryzen 3000 processors. I think it might be time for us to move on from Max Payne on a PC. As hard as it is for me to accept that, it might be kind of a fringe case.
It might. I like how he was like, it might. It might be a fringe case. It might be. Oh my goodness. This was a crazy story I was reading earlier this week up on Wired.com. It's a really good security story. It's the craziest thing. So Andy Greenberg wrote this up. Quote, hackers can use lasers to speak to your Amazon Echo or Google Home. By sending laser-powered light commands to a smart assistant, researchers could force it to unlock cars, open garage doors, and more. And essentially, this was it's pretty crazy. They a cybersecurity researcher, Takeshi Sugawara, and showed off this crazy hack where he was using a laser to talk to the microphone on his iPad, right? So it was he was fascinated because he was actually at that point he was just sending a tone or sending a wave on the laser, and the laser's impact on the iPad microphone was turned into an electrical signal, just as if it was sound. And then Sugawara worked with Fu, the professor at University of Michigan, Kevin Fu, and worked with a bunch of University of Michigan researchers, and used what they called a photoacoustic quirk. And they can silently communicate to anything that takes voice commands: smartphones, Amazon Echo speakers, Google Homes, Facebook's portal chat devices. And so they're calling them light commands by essentially turning a voice from a microphone into, running that over, converting it into frequencies on laser carrier and aiming that at the microphone on these devices. They can actually execute commands, right? Open the front door, open the garage, purchase things online. It's really just requires a line of sight. It'll work through a window. And, if you're not home to see the laser light, you're never really going to, or hear the device responding to these laser voice commands. It's just going to be untrackable. And of course, I immediately thought of that classic William Gibson line. It was on all I could think was like, the street finds its own uses for things. And on one hand, this is something that they can't really block without creating some sort of filter that goes over the microphone, and filters, physical light filters, i.e. things that block light, are generally bad for letting sound through. And then I realized, well, the fix for this, of course, is to locate your voice command devices in a way that you turn the microphone away from Windows, which may be impractical for some people. But it's pretty fascinating. In some devices they could communicate with using lasers just by like blanketing the entire thing with light. In other cases, they had to use a telephoto lens and a tripod to precisely aim it on the microphone. But it's pretty cool. It's a pretty fascinating article. It's a pretty good video on there where it shows them with a laser pointer and a tripod connected to the device that's converting the acoustical signal into the laser. Pretty cool. It's worth checking out if you like reading about interesting hacks. And it's also, I think this is one of those things, like, if you're worried about corporate espionage, or if you work for a 3-letter agency, and you actually do have, Echo or Home or Portal or whatever in your home, you may want to think about relocating it or removing it if you're feeling particularly paranoid. I just thought that was fascinating. The other thing that's fascinating in light of Samsung's nightmarish earnings report last week, they've just given up on custom CPU development. Is it over at Samsung?
It sounds insane, because we just talked about a new Exynos chipset a week or two ago, but there were these rumors and ruminations about layoffs, and then AnandTech got it confirmed back on November 4th, this was a few days ago, that they are indeed discontinuing their custom CPU development, and that means no more Exynos processors, which it doesn't really impact U.S. customers in the same way. I'm curious to see what the solution will be internationally, because Samsung traditionally had 2 versions of every flagship handset, where they'd have their own in-house Exynos chipset, and that would be on the international versions of the phone, and then the U.S. version would have a Qualcomm solution. So either they go all Qualcomm, or maybe they're just going to be repackaging vanilla ARM, which is something that we've kind of seen. Like, Huawei doesn't exactly just use vanilla, but that's what they base their Kirin processors on. And that could be the future of international phones from Samsung, but that puts them at a pretty big disadvantage relative to Qualcomm. Whereas Samsung was a little bit more competitive with Exynos if you looked at international versus US benchmarks. But it's interesting. I mean, they have the solution already, and they use it in half the phones they produce. So it's not as big a story as it would be if suddenly we heard Apple has discontinued internal CPU development, because that would be the end. I mean, their entire ecosystem is based on owning the CPU, owning the operating system, and controlling all the hardware. So.
Oh, well, I don't know. This sounds like a efficiency scale. I think it sounds like they're just going to be shutting down CPU production at this point, or shutting down the fabs. Maybe they just. I mean, given the number of phones they were selling worldwide, I obviously I don't know the math involved, but maybe Qualcomm offered them a fat deal, or maybe, like you said, they're going to go with something generic. But
yeah, it'd be interesting to see. And the rest of this is I'll have to look into this more to see if this affects or had anything to do with like the actual modem development, because we talked about the fact that the new Qualcomm modem is actually, it was not easy to integrate into the SoC. It's a separate chip. There are rumors about that being integrated into the next generation iPhone. Mm-hmm. And we can only speculate about what that means for the next generation iPhone design, and would it have to be larger to accommodate a second chip, as tightly packed as those things already are. But it's just kind of interesting to see if they're getting out of just the CPU side, or if they're not going to be developing anything, and if they even made their own baseband to begin with. I'd have to read more. But kind of a big headline.
It's all getting terribly complicated.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. If you were running iOS, if you recently had an update to 13.2 point whatever, 13.2 actually came out October 28th, but Mac Rumors has an update or an announcement or a heads up that Apple's releasing 13.2.2, and the big motivation for that was a bunch of bug fixes. Big one being for background apps that are getting killed off unexpectedly, because the operating system was being a bit aggressive about that, and one that caused problems connecting to cell data after a call. So if you've been having either of those two issues, keep poking on the system button until you see the software update for that. And if you are a bleeding edge enthusiast and you're running the 13.3 beta, I believe these have already been fixed in the 13.3 beta. But yeah, basically fixing background apps that are quitting unexpectedly. Quote, says Apple, resolving an issue where the iPhone may temporarily lose cellular service after a call, which I guess is a bigger issue than data. Addresses an issue where cellular data may temporarily not be available. Fixes an issue that caused replies to /MIME encrypted email messages between exchange accounts to be unreadable. Addresses an issue where Kerberos single sign-on service in Safari may present an authentication prompt. Resolves an issue where charging may be interrupted on YubiKey lightning-powered accessories. So it's always something. Always something driving people crazy. But keep an eye out for that. I have not had any of those issues, although I don't think I've even seen the data issue, but I'm usually pretty aggressive about installing iOS updates as soon as they're available. I don't think this is going to be a difference for me. If you have questions or concerns about operating system updates on iOS, I'd be curious to hear them. Do us a favor, email twich, twich @twit.tv. Oh my goodness, I love iFixit. iFixit is a place to find information on how to repair stuff, whether it's, for example, iPhones, replacing screens or batteries, computers, desktops, washing machines. There's a staggering number of incredibly well illustrated thought, I should say. It's the guides for repairing things are awesome. And of course, this episode of This Week in Computer Hardware is brought to you by iFixit. iFixit, they want to make it easy to replace the battery in your Mac or PC yourself with their all-in-one fix kits. If your laptop or phone is a few years old, it is probably time for a new battery. And if you're thinking, I don't have the tools, iFixit's got you covered. They put everything you need in the iFixit fix kits: parts, batteries, tools, and they are backed by an industry-leading warranty. And I mentioned it before, you get the most helpful repair guides on the internet for free. They don't care if you're buying parts. They don't care if you're buying tools. They want to keep stuff out of landfills. They want to help you keep your stuff running for as long as possible. Doesn't matter if you're fixing a screen or a motherboard. They've got some sweet repair guides for you. And they can help with more than just your phone. They have step-by-step instructions with amazing photos to see how easy it is to do it yourself. They can help you repair game consoles, PlayStation, Xbox, Nintendo, Kindles, iPads, Windows. If you're worried about your tablet, Mac, and PC computers, you got a camera issue, they have almost all major brands covered in the repair guides, even items for your car and truck, from your battery to your sun visor, even your brake pads. They have guides to fix appliances and apparel. That's clothing, people. iFixit wants to help you keep stuff lasting longer. They want to keep things out of landfills. They want to make sure products last as long as they could, not maybe as long as the manufacturer wants them to, and I'm okay with that. We've used the iFixit kits. I have one. My kids have one. My wife has one. There's one actually sitting in a box about 6 feet from me right now because they're useful. Glasses, electronics, parts around the Airstream. I've used them to help deal with carburetor issues on older vehicles for a friend of mine. And, of course, for about 1 billion repairs on phones and laptops and other electrical devices and tools. iFixit can help you fix just about anything. Check out their all-in-one fix kits at ifixit.com/twitch, and you'll get $10 off your next $50 fix. That's ifixit.com/twitch. And we want to thank iFixit for their support of This Week in Computer Hardware. As a Raspberry Pi enthusiast, I feel delighted and excited. I should have mentioned this last week, but there is a pretty slick firmware update for it. It's, oh my goodness. So Raspberry Pi 4, faster than Pi 3. It had some overheating issues, which was problematic because, of course, when CPUs overheat these days, they don't melt out. They throttle down to reduce the heat and keep things in the thermal design envelope for the device. And in many cases, actually, they'd be throttling down the CPU even if you had an aftermarket cooler on there. So there's a new bootloader that contains a bunch of updates, and there's a low power mode for the USB hub. Because it turns out it wasn't actually the processor generating all the heat, it was the USB adapter. And there were some issues with one that came out earlier this summer, an update, because it was taking USB 3 speeds down to pathetic kilobit per second levels instead of the massive megabyte per second levels they were used to. But, RPI EEPROM does the automatic updates for the Pi 4 owners, and it's pretty cool. There's a slick, basically NetBoot beta that's out with this one too. So I'm kind of excited about this. I actually have the Raspberry Pi 4, and I'm getting ready to do the update on that. I will report more about that. But yeah, network booting is being added, and lowering temperatures without compromising performance, which is a big deal. So hopefully I'll have some more to say about that next week. And if you're running a Raspberry Pi 4, update your firmware. It's going to make a big difference. Not exactly another Raspberry Pi. What's NVIDIA got?
Well, it's small like a Raspberry Pi. It won't be as inexpensive. I think one of the appeals of the Raspberry Pi is that it's a computing platform that costs around $35. But the Jetson Xavier NX is this new system on module, so a little PC on a card, and it's going to be $400. But if you actually look at the specs of this thing, it's kind of a monster. It combines a 384-core Volta GPU, has 48 tensor cores. It's a 6-core ARM v8.2 processor. It's an NVIDIA Caramel processor. And then 8 gigs of memory, 16 gigs of eMMC storage on board. And it's interesting. But this is geared towards... It's being advertised as the world's smallest AI supercomputer for embedded and edge systems. I would find it fascinating to see what else you could do with this thing, but the price is too high. I was actually searching around for the price right before we talked about this story, and like, $399. Okay, well, I mean, I find the Raspberry Pi's performance to be a bit lacking for doing certain things at times. But that's massive overkill and probably not compatible with anything that I want to do anyway. But still interesting that they've managed to cram this much computing power into 70 by 45 millimeters. I'd like to see this in a phone.
Impressed, sir.
Battery life might not be
going to be like on that phone?
But yeah. Hey, speaking of giant things, actually, that wasn't giant, but 43.3 billion. What does that number mean to you?
It's big.
And I think,
so
I think
very,
we've heard about
very
this product
big
before, but Intel has now released or introduced what they're calling the world's highest capacity FPGA. It's the Stratix 10 GX10M, and I think that's the entire product name. I think it's called the 10M because it has 10.2 million logic elements. But I just looked at this and saw it's freaking huge. It has 43.3 billion transistors on it. I mean, it's an FPGA. It's not like it's going to be limited to just one application. It's a programmable thing that could be used for just an unimaginable number of things. But I'm sure this will be targeting some sort of industrial application or AI. But
are you just excited because it's so big?
I am. I just saw 43.3 billion transistors. I mean, we've talked about the Moore's law and the increase in transistor count with GPUs, especially because they seem to lead the way these days. And then CPUs kind of slowly catch up. And the next GPU core comes out and it has even more transistors than before. And I don't think I've ever seen anything with as many transistors in it before, but maybe such a thing.
I was going to say like a 13,600,000,000 transistors.
Yeah, the transistor count, 13.6 billion transistors for TU-104. It's a little bit higher for the TU-102 core and the TI, but nowhere near.
This is like 3.5 times that.
Yeah.
What are good? Yes.
They've actually attached multiple ASICs together, I think. Like, this is not just one massive thing. They're actually stitching multiple things together physically and operationally. So just nuts. And I think there was a recent show where they actually had some version of this on stage, and it's a large square of computing power. And of course, the first thing I think of with this is maybe this is a solution to finally make an N64 ASIC based, or I'm sorry, FPGA based emulator, like the stuff from Analog we talked about a month ago or so. Like, they have the new Pocket Analog thing. Analog's a company that makes these FPGA based, so essentially hardware emulators for game systems. And they have the Super NT, and they have a new one that's based on the Genesis.
I feel like that would be a prohibitively expensive emulator. Like, it might be easier to just buy a couple dozen off eBay and just run them till they drop.
Where's the fun in that? And then you've got to HDMI mod them and stuff. It gets really complicated really fast. Just like N64 emulation in general is really complicated. But enough about emulation, I'm sure.
You'd think it would be easy. They're so small. They're so chill.
Yeah.
And yet, oh my goodness. Microsoft HoloLens 2 shipped today for $3,500. Obviously not your augmented reality for everyday users, unless your pocketbook is considerably larger than ours. Audie Robertson's got the write-up on The Verge about this one. So it's going out to pre-order customers. And I didn't realize, like, the original HoloLens, it's 2016, so it'd been a long time since it came out. But the field of view is been updated considerably, and it's up to like 52 degrees from 34 degrees diagonally. Microsoft says that means the overall area has more than doubled, which Mr. Robertson points out that you can debate the specifics on that. It's still better. I mean, that was my complaint when I first got my eyeballs on a HoloLens. It was big, and they kind of did a disservice to the community when they were creating all of the marketing materials for that, because they created all the marketing materials with sort of a stereoscopic red camera setup. And if you're watching the video, you see me sort of holding my hands up as if I have giant sort of antenna eyeballs on stalks above my head. But you would be anticipating this incredible, immersive, like 180-degree stereoscopic experience. And then when you got the HoloLens on, you were basically looking through a rectangle about the size of a large bar of soap. And it worked, and it did what it was supposed to. And you could stand in this virtual environment and scan, the wall that was going to be built, and look at the blueprints to figure out, there's a pipe where we want to put a door. Can we relocate the pipe, right? Because architectural walkthroughs are still one of the huge, it's one of the places where people spend a lot of money to do cool things with VR or AR for that matter. And the other thing is that you are getting a significant redesign in terms of the ergonometrics, so you're not feeling like there's a giant thing hanging off the front of your face. It's still a fairly large thing, but the weight is better centered. They're also doing full gesture tracking now. No longer, because originally the original HoloLens was doing an air tap thing. Now they have full gestures. Pinch and drag objects, pull up menus. Quotes by tapping a holographic button on your wrist. So, this is a pure business play. There were some art apps, there were some games for the original HoloLens, Mr. Robertson notes, but this is all about business and getting more businesses to use HoloLens as platform and making the HoloLens experience significantly better. If this is you, it's $3,500. And you can start looking at it now. Did you just catch up on that?
Well, the $3,500 part, which it makes sense. Like you said, they're targeting business. And it's funny, this is Microsoft we're talking about here. So, of course, they should be targeting business. How much success have they had with consumer devices other than Xbox? So, not a ton that I can think of. But I'm trying not to be snarky here. I'm just saying, like, maybe VR isn't ready for mainstream audiences yet.
Well, this is
not
AR.
just a HoloLens thing. You're right. But I feel like they're sort of linked somehow. Just getting people to put on a headset makes a lot more sense in a controlled environment where somebody else is managing all the technical back end for you. So and I will say, meetings remotely kind of suck, and they have forever. But with all the technology we have now, typically if you're on a web meeting, you're looking at a laptop screen or your monitor, and you're looking at a tiny video box of somebody else, and they're trying to present something and they can share their screen. But then if you're in a room trying to interact with a group of people, and I had this experience recently, I won't name the company or anything, but they were trying to show media something that they had in the room with them, and they were dealing with one ultra wide angle lens, and they looked like they were a mile away. And they were trying to, send a full screen. I'm just like, guys, what if we just put on like VR headsets and could like experience the room with you? Like, yeah, wouldn't that be great? But anyway, anything that makes those meetings better is probably worth $3,500.
Yeah. I don't know what to tell you. Oh my goodness. It was funny. I'm trying to find Dieter Bahn over at The Verge did a really great Twitter summary of the Surface 2, and I am sad to say I can't find it because the man tweets so much, but it was amazing. Oh, here it is. Here's my Microsoft Surface Pro review. I'm saying this because that last article was on The Verge, and let me drop this into the show notes because I'm going to be driving our long-suffering producer. Sorry, Kevin, completely nuts. This is really one of the great, sub 200 character reviews ever. Here's my Microsoft Surface Pro 10 review, or Surface Pro X review. It runs better than I expected on the ARM processor, but there's just no easy way to know if the apps you care about will work well or at all. It's great looking hardware, but that's not enough. I just wanted to give a shout out to anybody who has been trying to figure out if they should be looking at the new platform.
I like the brevity.
Really nice hardware. Yeah. Yeah, really good battery life. Watch out for, apparently just app support is I will use my words, not Mr. Bond's word, and say a train wreck, because you just don't know what's going to be happening on that. So other thing that's going on this week, we were talking about AR just a second ago. Google is now open sourcing Cardboard, i.e. the phone-based VR system. Now that Daydream, as I said, they've basically abandoned Daydream. Daydream's dead. I think this is probably This is going to do one of two things. Either all of a sudden there's going to be a zillion interesting phone-based VR things, which I doubt, or that this is probably the end of phone-based VR. Not that I was ever a huge fan of phone-based VR, but it was so accessible. At least you had an Android device. And on a more cheerful note, I was terrified because I got an email that Mr. Speakers was going away, which is my sort of favorite high-end audio headphone manufacturer. But it is actually not going away. It's been renamed to Dan Clark Audio, Dan Clark being the sort of guru over at Mr. Speakers. And they launched a new version of what I think is one of the best deals in audio. Now, don't freak out when I tell you the price, but the Aeon 2, which is a massive update from the original Aeon. I own one of their open and one of their closed headsets. I bought them used, but I paid for them out of my own pocket. But the new $899 Aeon 2 and Aeon 2 open back version, I've talked to several people who have had ears on who say they sound fantastic and are an improvement over the Aeon, which is an impressive thing to me because the Aeon was already spectacularly good. And those will be going on sale in the near future. I think you can order them already on the website, but I've been hearing questions about when they're actually going to be fulfilling these. And those, of course, are made in beautiful San Diego, California, right here in the United States. And we've talked a whole bunch about inexpensive headphones from $22 to $75 for really, really great audio quality. I just mentioned this because I've mentioned Mr. Speakers and the Aeon several times as being an amazing headphone for the money, i.e. it competes with headphones that other places are selling for well over $1,000 or $2,000. And I think it's one of the great bargains, and I'll call it high-end audio, although actual high-end audiophile people will hear me say that and go like, because, audio is one of those
$899. You're calling that high-end? I spent $899 on my last pair of replacement ear pads.
I was going to say cables, but...
No, just the ear pads. The cables would be at least $2,000.
I will say I'm really excited. Yeah, $2,000. Don't make me. Don't. I was laughing.
That's just for bare copper. Look, don't judge me. I didn't have enough money for the silver coated, or actually, do they have? Yeah, the pure silver cables, which are $9,999.95.
I won't even get started on that. I will say one of the nice updates to this is they changed so the headphone, the halo, the part that clamps the headphones to your ear, they actually changed it so it folds over, and apparently the new enclosure, the new case that ships with these is 1/3 of the size of the one that came with the original Aeons. And if you're somebody who travels with headphones, don't have a lot of space, that's a pretty exciting concept. Haven't heard it yet. Some people whose ears I trust say that it's a pretty massive improvement, and it's a really cool... I don't know. I like to see them continue to do stuff. This is $100 more than the original Aeon. The original Aeon, they're selling refurbished versions of those up at danclarkaudio.com, or if you type in mrspeakers.com, it just automatically redirects to Dan Clark Audio. But for, I want to say like $679, it's pretty cool. They apparently flipped the driver structure 180 degrees. Well, they did. The driver structures flipped 180 degrees, and apparently the magnet and flow structures are no longer between the diaphragm and the ear. The diaphragm, of course, being the fancy sheet of plastic with the traces on it. They run electricity through those. Those work against the magnet. When they say the flow structures, those are holes in the magnet to allow air to pass through, to allow the diaphragm to move freely. And I'm really, 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 really excited to hear these, because the original Aeons, the closed Aeons, have some of the most spectacular sound staging, i.e. the recreation of audio in a stereo situation that I've ever heard on a closed headphone. So I'm very, very curious to hear the improvements on this, and whether or not they are sort of like, I'm going to sell one of my children's kidneys so I can buy a pair of these immediately, or if it feels more moderate than that. But props to Dan Clark for doing what he's doing, which is, delivering, for example, a 3,000 electrostatic instead of 50,000, like a lot of his competitors at the high end. And I'm excited about this. Some new speakers also coming out from Emotiva. If you're looking for inexpensive set of desktops, no sign of any of their powered speakers, which would make for a fantastic desktop speaker to go along with your computer or your gaming system. But they're delivering some new speakers in the near future. So pretty sure there's no NDA on that, but I should probably double check. No, good.
Oh, yeah.
You know that moment of panic where you're like, did I just violate an NDA in a public forum being openly broadcast? No, I did not.
Good. Yes.
Always a plus. PCPer.com is the home away from home. It's the virtual home, the online home of Sebastian Peak.
Really,
he's the editor-in-chief, and he writes a lot of stuff there, and it's good. And if you're looking for help building a new system, especially with all the new processors coming out this month, do yourself a favor and go to the leaderboard at PCPer.com. It gives you guides and reasons why the parts are included, those guides. Not that I don't love PC Parts Picker, but occasionally PC Parts Picker can be emotionally and physically overwhelming. If you're looking for a good list of parts at a given price point, go to the leaderboard at PCPer.com. You can, of course, find me here at This Week in Computer Hardware. That's twit.tv/twitch, TWICH, if you want to find all of our older episodes and information on how to subscribe. And Robert Heron and I revived AVXL last week, so avxl.com is a place to hear me talking about home theater and audio and screens and headphones and all of that in alarming depth, to the point that even Sebastian kind of looks over and goes, dude, dial back the enthusiasm. You're just a little too into this stuff, which is a perfectly reasonable response.
I would never say
you
that.
might.
Not about home theater.
Let's talk about raising children. That'll really get you quick.
By the way, you mentioned the hardware leaderboard at PCPer.com. I just checked to make sure that it was still there. We have a bit of a difference of opinion internally at PCPer about the importance of sound cards. And, we just got done talking about headphones. I reviewed a sound card at the beginning of this year. I still think sound cards are valid. And if you're putting together a dream system, maybe you would buy one of those like deluxe $200-$300 sound cards. And Jeremy, instead, has a Turtle Beach Santa Cruz sound card in the ultimate build, which of course is not even compatible.
That's
with the
certainly
build.
an option.
It's a PCI 32-bit sound card. But hey, I applaud his. If he was a big fan of that retro Turtle Beach. Turtle Beach had great wavetable sound. Not really known for. I think that was all they were really known for. They're that modern Windows audio system kind of sound card. But anyway, I just had to check. I had to mention that. It's not a real thing. I mean, you might be able to find a used one on Amazon, but that's. I mean, a $3,100 build and no sound card. Who's the editor-in-chief of this website?
I don't know, but he needs to be stopped.
Exactly.
I'm embarrassed on your behalf. It should be an outboard sound card, but that's
exactly.
a whole.
Really, yeah, you're right. At that point, buy your own DAC, have a DAC and an amp, and If
you're going to spend that much money, spend more. That's really what we're about here at PCPer.com. No.
Yes.
Not even going to go there.
Why buy the $220 card when there's a $240 card? And speaking of $240, what about $259 and $279 and $309 and $329?
Ladies and gentlemen, you've been listening to This Week in Computer Hardware. If it's your first episode, that's Twitch. If you're looking for it on your favorite podcaster this week, or your favorite podcatcher, not podcaster. Hopefully we're your favorite podcasters. And if not, that's okay. Just keep listening and subscribe. Search for This Week in Computer Hardware on your favorite podcatcher, or go to twit.tv/twitch for more information. And thank you guys and gals for listening. If you have questions, please send them to twitch@twit.tv. And with that, I'm Patrick Norton.
And I am Sebastian Peak.
We'll catch you next week on Twitch.